The story I am about to tell you happened to me personally, in mid-October 1989. I, then quite a young man, went on another adventurous kayaking trip through the lakes of Karelian with my friend Dimka, who was 7 years older than me. Such trips usually took us about a week. That fall we were kayaking down the Sooner River. We spent the first few nights in a tent, but on the fifth night we accidentally stumbled upon a forest hut of local Karelians standing on one of the small wooded islands. Toward evening the weather turned bad. Clouds came from somewhere, drizzling with a nasty little rain. It was a good luck to find such a place for overnight stay. Having arrived, we unloaded, pulled out the kayak and turned it upside down. We didn't have to look for a road for a long time. Only one path led to the cabin. The rest of the sides of the cabin were impassable, because everything was overgrown with small bushes. At that time people did not steal as they do now. There were enough utensils in the hut: mattresses, dishes, candles. There was even a kerosene burner. I don't even speak about a week's supply of food, a whole shelf of 1-liter glass jars in which cereals, pasta, and other food that could be stored for a long time was hidden from mice. There was even a small cellar in the cabin, where there was a can of stew, a couple of cans of pearl barley and pork, and even a cup of vodka. Also in the cellar for some reason lay a small icon of St. Nicholas. Now I know who was depicted on the icon, but back then orthodoxy was a blank spot on the map of my world. The hut itself was a log cabin made of dead wood. The cracks between the logs were filled with dry moss. There were bunks along the walls, and in the center there was a table, so it was convenient to sit at the table and sleep at it. The table leaned against the end wall of the hut with its narrow side, and there was a window in the wall just above it. Another window was above a small table, next to a metal stove. There was also a small table, like a kitchen table, with a pine block under it, which served as a stool. In general, it was a very cozy and warm place. Even the front door was insulated from the inside with fiberglass with a thick layer of batting under it. There was no lock, of course. The door was just propped by a pole so that the wind wouldn't accidentally open it. From inside, the door was locked with an ordinary hook. It was a tiring day at the oars, but the fishing was nice. Behind the hut, as if to order, there was even a small metal smoker. Alder grew nearby, so that by supper there was a deafening smell of smoked perch on the table. We did not take out the cup from the cellar. We had a dark rum in a metal flask for such an occasion, but we took out an icon and put it on the table. Just as we were getting ready to go to dinner, there was a knock at the door. Dimka and I decided that someone from the owners of the hut had dropped in, and we were already despondent, imagining another night in the tent. We did not want to go out of the heated hut into the cold damp. However, we made it. One of the local Karelians, a short, stocky man, asked us to stay with him. It is difficult to remember now how he was dressed. I think he was wearing a woolen jacket, a kind of a hat, striped pants tucked into boots, which was not quite usual. It was not customary to introduce oneself. Fate brought together under one roof for one night. Divorced and separated, the travelers forgot each other. We invited the man to the table. He did not refuse. He sat down and took a piece of bread wrapped in newspaper, nodded at the icon. "Did you get it from under the floor?" The man spoke with a distinct Karelian accent, stressing every vowel in the word, so that the speech sounded as unusually solemn. "Yes, we got it. Why?" Dimker and I were surprised at the question. "In vain," he answered briefly, and he put the icon face down. After we had finished with fish and rum, the man went to the kitchen table, sat on a log, and smoked a pipe. By that time it had gone dark. The drizzle had been replaced by a fine snowfall, still short-lived, but foreboding of the coming winter. One candle was left burning on the table, and the evening in the cabin in the middle of a deep forest put us in a mystical mood. We discussed books for a long time, and then the conversation turned to various topics concerning the world of spirits. I told him how my buddies and I, after reading a lot of Conan Doyle's Ouija novels, tried to practice hay fever, then suggested that we try driving a saucer. Dimka, who used to talk a lot, suddenly fell silent. I tried to continue the topic of spiritualism, but Dimka, cutting me off somehow abruptly, asked me to be quiet. We smoked in silence for 5 minutes, and then he began to tell me, asterisk asterisk asterisk. About 10 years ago I served in a communications company. We were getting ready for demobilization, when suddenly we were dropped for maneuvers. Our company was stationed not far from Tambov, in an abandoned collective farm. The company was small, mostly signalers. There were 4 of us in our company. Me, Tolik the driver, Vidya the radio operator, and Slavik. Slavik was our centerpiece, the cook. We were all already old servicemen, as they used to say, grandfathers. Accordingly, we could afford more than the other soldiers. We didn't have much work, we had enough time, and in the evenings me and the boys used to play preference. We played in the cowshed, which was a stone's throw from our tents. Yeah, we weren't sitting in a cow stall, of course. Between the barn stalls there was a corridor, the floor of which was broken in some places and rotten in others, but it was possible to pass with a flashlight. This corridor led us to a door that led to a restroom. That's where we were sitting. And so, in the evening we gathered in the barn, lit a candle and sat down. Our stools were the same kind of longs as we had in the barn, only much heavier. They must have been oak, we could hardly move them. Slavka was late. Bullet must be written for 3. Tolik did not play preference, and play with the hussar did not want to. Then Tolik suggested the idea. Let's call the spirits, he said. I know how. I can teach you too. It's not complicated, but it's fun. You can scare the girls in civilian life. Everyone was excited by the idea. Tolik said we needed a sheet of paper, a saucer, a candle, and a pencil. I had the pencil. Tolik found a saucer with a crack in the cupboard, and a piece of wallpaper peeled off the wall by Vidya was a piece of paper. Tolik spread out the sheet on the table, marked it into sectors, and wrote letters and numbers. A cracked saucer was placed on the sheet, a burning candle in the left corner of the sheet, and it began. We placed 2 fingers of each hand on the saucer. First Tolik summoned the spirit of Napoleon, then someone else, I do not remember now. I remember that the saucer ran over the sheet of paper. The crack was pointing at the letters at such a speed that we barely had time to put them into words. We tried to catch which one of us was moving the saucer, asking tricky questions from our own past that no one was supposed to know about. The spirits would answer any question we had. It seemed like they knew everything about us. But even this was not enough for Tolik. He demanded that the spirits prove they were real. From there the nightmare began. The saucer froze abruptly, and immediately the candle went out. We jumped to our feet. Heavy rhythmic thumps could be heard coming from the corridor leading to the recreation room. It didn't immediately dawn on me that it was footsteps. So heavy and somehow slow was someone walking down the corridor. The closest comparison was probably the footsteps of the commander's statue. There was no light in the total darkness through the cracks in the doorboards, and I have already told you that one cannot walk across such a rotten floor in total darkness without a flashlight. The heavy footsteps, which made the floor shudder, were coming closer. Tolik lit a candle. The pounding of footsteps fell silent. There hung a lingering pause. Everyone stared at the door. After about 10 seconds, which lasted at least 5 minutes according to my gut feeling, the door slowly opened and our Slavik walked in, clutching a thermos to his chest. The picture would have been funny if it weren't for Slavik's completely white face, staring fearfully in front of him. I looked back and saw that Slavik was looking at Vitek. Vitek, 6 feet tall and weighing a little over 50 pounds, was holding an oak block over his head that weighed as much as Vitek himself. The general stupor was interrupted by the thud of the log falling on the floor behind Vidya. The candle went out again. When we lit it, we saw that the door was closed and Slavik was not in the room. Then a rustling on the table caught our attention. We watched in horror as the saucer, crawling on its own on a piece of paper, wrote "Is that enough?" and then split in half by a crack. Without a word, we rushed for air, away from here. We didn't find Slavka that night. He was found in the morning, behind the village. He had been nailed with a pitchfork through his chest to the back wall of the barn. The blow had been so hard that his chest had been pressed inward. Slavka's blue face was terribly mangled, as if it had been hit with a sledgehammer. His eye dangled on a string of nerves. I still dream about that picture. Tolik, as soon as he saw what became of Slavka, went to the guardhouse, took his gun from the sentry and shot himself. Then there was an investigation. We were dragged through various authorities, but soon got rid of, blaming everything on Tolik. So from that day on, spiritualism was enough for the rest of my life. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The night in the deep woods, the flickering light of a lonely candle in the middle of the table, the dim light of a pipe, highlighting red thick eyebrows of the night visitor, made Dimka's story understand how fragile and transparent is the barrier that separates the world of the unknown from our world. It was the master who was acting up at the time. The man broke the silence. You called him in and didn't give him a drink, so he got angry and took his own. And who is he, this master? I asked him. It depends. Sometimes Halsha can be a hooligan. You call it a spirit. But your master was not Halsha. He only took one. Halsha would have taken them all. Yours was a sorcerer. Didn't have time to give up his power before he died, so he was pissed off, undead. How do you know? Dimka got excited. I know, and it's time for you to sleep. The man puffed on the pipe, and we passed out, like an anesthetic. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. In the morning, when we woke up, we saw that the man was gone. Having decided that he had gone quietly, we quickly boiled the kettle on the stove, and at the same time burned in it the remains of yesterday's dinner. While we were waiting for boiling water, we got ready for the road. But when we opened the door, we were a little surprised. More precisely, we were stunned. The snow that had fallen that night was a thin layer all over the clearing surrounding the hut. And in this snow there was no trace, neither to the hut, nor from the hut. Thinking that the man decided to play a trick on us, we went back to the hut. There was absolutely nowhere to hide, but we checked everything possible. We looked under the bunk, stuck his nose in the basement. Icon of Nicholas the Wonderworker again lay in the cellar. The man was nowhere to be found. The only evidence of his visit was a rolled up, forgotten on the table. Having opened it, we were stunned for the second time. The piece of newspaper Karelian Commune, dated July 20, 1928, had a huge crust of rye bread, completely inedible due to its fossilization. The roll also flew into the stove, where it immediately burst into flames as if the bread had been soaked in alcohol. We took our luggage and went to the shore, where the overturned kayak lay. There we were stunned for the third time. Thin as paper, the morning shore ice was untouched along the entire shore. That is, no one had come or gone on the island. The weather in the morning did not resemble yesterday's. It was absolutely calm. The kayak was sailing along the perfect mirror of the lake, in which the blue sky was reflected. The air was crystal clear, cool in the morning, as if the kayak was suspended between the water and the sky, and it was unclear where the one ends and the other begins. The sun had already risen above the horizon, shining through the golden autumnal crowns of the trees growing on the shores of the lake. The bark of the pines also seemed golden in these rays, and the whole landscape breathed so peacefully that all our nightly experiences began to fade into oblivion. Still, we had to be surprised once more. Away from the island, about 100 meters away, we saw in a small cove a waving ball of gray foam. Deciding at least here to find out what was what, we swam to the ball. But before we swam 10 meters, we saw a dinghy with two women sitting in it. Both of them had smoking pipes sticking out of their mouths. Well, that's a hell of a smoke, snorted Dimka. We laughed softly, holding back so as not to accidentally knock over the laden kayak. But we still swam up to the boat. It was interesting what kind of a man had spent the night with us. After listening to our description of the man, an aunt said, "This is Fedkalesonen, our daddy. He was a good man, he didn't refuse any weddings. But he died a long time ago, 50 years ago. My mother told me about him, how he suffered, he couldn't give his power to anyone. Our people were all Komsomol members. They didn't believe in fairy tales. They didn't want to deal with a sorcerer. They'd forgotten how much good he'd done to people. Yes, that's right, Fedia. He brought my father up when his back was broken by a pine tree. Yes, it seems to people now, too, said the second one. Well, if you're alive, it means our daddy liked you. He who leaves him alive won't be sick for a year, added the first. Did he leave you anything? The second one. Yes, he did.